In the previous episode, we explored the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt, an era of powerful kings and monumental architecture. We also saw how central authority gradually weakened, leading to the collapse of the Old Kingdom and the fragmentation of Egypt during the First Intermediate Period. In the aftermath, Egypt was divided among several rival dynasties. Over time, however, two major powers emerged. In the north, the 10th Dynasty, based in the city of Heracleopolis, and in the south, the 11th Dynasty, based in the city of Thebes. The southern kings soon expanded their influence, incorporating neighboring nomes and gradually consolidating control over Upper Egypt. Thebes began expanding northwards during the reign of Mentuhotep II, and the territories he acquired were secured by his son, Mentuhotep III. Around 2055 BC, Mentuhotep III was succeeded by his son, Mentuhotep II. His name, also spelled as Mentuhotep, means Montu is pleased. Montu was a falcon-headed god of war prominent in Thebes and the patron deity of the 11th Dynasty. Mentuhotep ruled a stable kingdom, but war was brewing and tensions were rising across Egypt. During the 14th year of his reign, he brutally suppressed a rebellion and then turned northwards, launching a campaign into Lower Egypt. Some nomes loyal to Heracleopolis switched sides, while others resisted and were subjugated, until Mentuhotep entered Heracleopolis itself and overthrew the 10th dynasty. Evidence shows that during the sack of the city, even the royal tombs were desecrated. With little resistance remaining, Mentuhotep II extended his authority over Lower Egypt, finally reuniting the two lands around 2040 BC, marking the end of the First Intermediate Period and the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. Although victorious, Mentuhotep still faced the challenge of consolidating his rule, as unrest appears to have lingered in parts of Egypt. This unrest stemmed from the discontent of the nomarchs, the provincial governors who had developed substantial independence during the First Intermediate Period and now faced the reimposition of centralized control. Mentuhotep re-established authority over the nomarchs. Some, particularly those who had supported the Heracleopolitan rulers, were removed from power, while others were retained under closer supervision. New administrative positions were created, including officials responsible for both Upper and Lower Egypt, strengthening the control of the central government. At the same time, Mentuhotep promoted a powerful royal ideology to legitimize his rule. He emphasized his lineage, presenting himself as a rightful successor to earlier Theban rulers, and increasingly associated himself with the gods. He came to portray himself not only as a king chosen by the gods, but also as a divine figure in his own right. Over the course of his reign, he adopted multiple royal names, each reflecting a different aspect of his authority. Mentuhotep then turned his attention southward. The region of Lower Nubia, which had broken away from Egyptian control during the collapse of the kingdom, was now ruled by local chieftains. Through a series of military campaigns, he gradually re-established Egyptian influence in the region. In the aftermath, a garrison was established on the island of Elephantine to secure access to the south. Mentuhotep constructed a remarkable mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari on the west bank of the Nile near Thebes. It was built against the cliffs in a series of terraces connected by a long central ramp leading to an elevated platform. At the heart of the complex stood a large square structure surrounded by pillared colonnades. Behind it lay a hypostyle hall and the inner sanctuary, while the burial chamber was cut deep into the rock beneath the temple and accessed through a long descending passage. Mentuhotep II was succeeded by his son, Mentuhotep III. During the first years of his reign, he expanded trade and sent large expeditions to the Wadi Hammamet for stone. The Wadi Hammamet was a dry riverbed and a major trade route to the port of Qusair. The Egyptians used it heavily for quarrying, but it was a difficult region with frequent attacks from locals, which is why military protection was required. Mentuhotep III used these resources for his building projects, including the temple at Thoth Hill and the extension of the Temple of Montu, both near Thebes. Almost nothing is known about Mentuhotep III's successor, Mentuhotep IV, the last king of the 11th Dynasty. The lack of royal monuments and records points to growing instability, and it is likely that internal tensions or even a palace coup took place. Ultimately, in 1985 BC, Amenemhat, Mentuhotep's vizier, seized the throne, founding the 12th Dynasty and restoring central authority, ushering in the golden age of the Middle Kingdom. After becoming king, Amenemhat and his court left Thebes and established a new capital, Amenemhat I, meaning Amenemhat seizes the two lands, usually shortened to Ichtawi. Although the city has not yet been discovered, it was most likely located near the Fayum region. The new capital served several purposes. From there, Amenemhat could more effectively control both Upper and Lower Egypt, particularly the Nile Delta, which was unstable due to small incursions by Asiatic groups. At the same time, moving the capital helped reduce the influence of powerful Theban officials, allowing Amenemhat to surround himself with more loyal administrators. This move formed part of a broader policy aimed at weakening the power of the provincial nomarchs and reasserting royal control through officials directly dependent on the king. Its proximity to Memphis, Egypt's largest population center, was also strategically advantageous. Amenemhat led a campaign against the Asiatic raiders in the Nile Delta and constructed a great wall along Egypt's northeastern frontier. He also launched military expeditions into Lower Nubia and the Libyan desert. These were led by his son, Senusret, who had been appointed co-regent about 20 years into his father's reign. This system of co-regency helped secure the succession and strengthen the stability of the dynasty, a practice that would be adopted by all subsequent kings. Amenemhat's reign was, by all accounts, a prosperous period for Egypt. Stability was firmly re-established under the new dynasty, bringing an end to internal conflicts. Most importantly, wealth increased, even among ordinary Egyptians, largely due to expanded agricultural production made possible by this stability. Despite this prosperity, Amenemhat's reign did not end auspiciously. Around the 30th year of his rule, he was assassinated by his own bodyguards in his bedchamber. Whether the assassination was the result of a wider palace conspiracy or the independent actions of his guards remains unknown. What is certain is that the king was killed while his son and co-ruler was away on campaign in Libya. This event would have been deeply shocking to the Egyptians, for the king was regarded as a divine figure protected by the gods and responsible for maintaining cosmic order. It was during this period that two of the most famous works of ancient Egyptian literature were composed. The first is the tale of Sinuhe, which recounts the story of an Egyptian official who served Amenemhat I and accompanied his son on the Libyan campaign. Upon learning of the king's assassination, Sinuhe panicked, overwhelmed by fear of the instability that might follow, and fled. He wandered through foreign lands and eventually found refuge in the Near East, where he was welcomed by a local ruler. Over time, he rose to prominence, married into a powerful nomadic family, and lived a life of wealth and respect, fathering many children. Yet, despite this success abroad, he became deeply homesick. In his later years, he wrote to King Senusret, expressing his desire to return to Egypt. His request was granted, and he was received with honor and ultimately given a proper Egyptian burial. The second notable work from this period is The Teachings of Amenemhat. This text, both political and literary in nature, is presented as a speech by Amenemhat I addressed to his son and successor, Senusret. Framed as advice from beyond the grave, the king recounts the circumstances of the assassination, describing how he was attacked at night by those closest to him. This betrayal forms the central lesson of the text. Amenemhat warns his son not to trust anyone, and portrays kingship as a position requiring constant vigilance, where danger may arise from within as much as from external enemies. Gather yourself against dependents, nothing come of it. Anyone puts their heart in the direction of their fear. Never approach them alone. Trust none as brother. Make no friend. Create no intimates. It is worthless. In sleep, guard your heart yourself, for a man has no servants on the day of woe. I gave to the destitute and raised up the orphan. I promoted the man with nothing as much as the man of means. The very eater of my bread made the uprising. The one to whom I gave alms was creating fear from it. The one clothed in my fine linen was looking at me as if in rags. The one anointed with myrrh was as one who poured lowly water. At the same time, the work emphasizes the importance of strong leadership and recounts several of the king's achievements. Its tone is notably cynical, and it may have been written as a justification for the ruthlessness that future kings of the dynasty might display. For his tomb, Amenemhat resumed the construction of pyramids, consciously emulating the traditions of the Old Kingdom rulers. His pyramid complex was built near the modern village of El-Lisht, close to Cairo. Unlike the pyramids of the Old Kingdom, however, his structure had a mud brick core reinforced with small limestone blocks, many of which were reused from earlier monuments, and was encased in fine white Tura limestone. The interior of the pyramid has not been fully explored, as the passageways and burial chamber are now flooded with groundwater. Senusret I had a long and prosperous reign. One of his foremost concerns was securing Egypt's southern frontier. He launched 2 major campaigns into Lower Nubia, and his armies advanced as far south as the Second Cataract, establishing massive forts. These forts, built at strategic points, controlled river traffic and served as collection points for tribute and taxes. Senusret's campaigns transformed Lower Nubia into a formal Egyptian province. With the strong presence of the army, the Egyptians were able to more easily acquire the riches of the region, such as gold, amethyst, turquoise, and copper. Senusret also sought to assert his authority across Egypt through monumental construction. In Heliopolis, he erected a pair of massive red granite obelisks, one of which still stands today. At Thebes, he undertook significant works at Ibet Sut, the site where the later temple complex of Karnak would be built. The wide chapel, constructed from multiple blocks of alabaster, is one of his most famous projects and is adorned with finely carved reliefs depicting the king performing ritual acts. Following in his father's footsteps, Senusret built his pyramid at El-Lisht. The interior, like his father's, is flooded by groundwater and is therefore inaccessible. The surrounding complex included a mortuary temple, a central courtyard, and 9 smaller pyramids for his queens. A limestone causeway lined with statues connected the mortuary temple to a public temple outside the enclosure. After the death of Senusret, his son Amenemhat II succeeded him and enjoyed an equally long reign. During his rule, he sent mining expeditions into the Sinai Peninsula. There was also extensive trade with the peoples of the Levant, although conflicts occurred as well, since the region was divided into independent city-states, each maintaining different relations with Egypt. For his tomb, Amenemhat II chose to build a pyramid at Dashur, the site of Snefru's Red Pyramid from the 4th Dynasty. Known as the White Pyramid, little of it survives today. He was succeeded by his son, Senusret II, who ruled during a time of stability with no evidence of military campaigns. During his reign, trade with the Near East was expanded even further. His most important achievement was the large-scale development of the Fayum region, where he oversaw an ambitious irrigation project that reshaped the landscape. Through the construction of dikes and a network of canals, excess Nile water was redirected into the region, resulting in a significant expansion of agricultural production. For his tomb, Senusret II built a pyramid at El Lahun, near the entrance to the Fayum. The pyramid was constructed with a mud brick core supported by a framework of limestone cross walls and was then encased in fine limestone. He was succeeded by his son, Senusret III, who was later remembered as a great warrior. Contemporary records indicate that he led 5 campaigns into Lower Nubia against rebelling populations. These revolts were brutally suppressed. The king set up stelae on fortresses and along the southern border to commemorate his victories and warn the Nubians. One of these recounts the following. His Majesty established the southern border at He. I established my border further south than my forefathers. I added to what was bequeathed to me. I am a king who speaks and acts. I make happen what I conceive. Eager to seize, hasty to succeed, in whose heart a matter doesn't slumber, anticipating inferiors, suppressing mercy, merciless to the enemy who attacks him, who attacks one who would attack, who is silent when one is silent, who replies to a matter as befits it. For to be idle after an attack is to strengthen the heart of the enemy. Aggression is valor and retreat is cowardice. Who is driven from his border is truly a coward, for the Nubian listens to the word of mouth. Answering him is making him retreat. If one acts aggressively towards him, he turns his back. Retreat, and he will take occasion to act aggressively, for they are not respectable people, they are wretches with broken spirits. Senusret III also led an expedition against cities in the Levant, from which he brought many captives back to Egypt. The king attempted to further centralize power with varying degrees of success. An interesting aspect of Senusret III is the various statues that have been found, many of which depict the king with weary features and in old age. This contrasts with earlier depictions of kings, which emphasized strength and youthfulness. Elements of this new artistic style would continue in later periods. For his tomb, Senusret III built a pyramid at Dashur, the largest of the 12th Dynasty. The complex included several mastabas and pyramids for members of his immediate family, as well as a mortuary temple. Within the complex, 4 funerary boats have been excavated. Senusret III was succeeded by his only child, Amenemhat III, who enjoyed a prosperous reign. He strengthened Egypt's eastern frontier and continued mining expeditions in Nubia, the Wadi Hammamet and the Sinai, as well as quarrying limestone and granite at Tura and Aswan. Much of this activity supported his extensive building projects, including the foundation of a temple dedicated to Sobek in the Fayum. Sobek, depicted either as a crocodile or as a man with a crocodile head, was a deity associated with fertility in the Nile and was considered the father of all crocodiles. He was especially worshipped in the Fayum and the Nile Delta. During this period, both Sobek and Amun, the god of creation who would later be regarded as king of the gods, rose significantly in prominence. Amenemhat III constructed 2 pyramids, becoming the first king since Sneferu of the 4th Dynasty to build more than one for himself. His first pyramid, built at Dashur and known as the Black Pyramid, encountered serious structural problems during construction. Cracks formed in the mud brick core, which had originally been encased in limestone. Although builders attempted to reinforce the structure with internal supports, the damage proved irreversible and the pyramid was abandoned. Nevertheless, it was later used as the burial place for 2 of Amenemhat's queens. The pyramid's capstone has survived and is now displayed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. A second pyramid was constructed at Hawara, where Amenemhat III was ultimately buried. This pyramid featured a far more sophisticated internal layout, including hidden entrances, false corridors, sliding stone panels, and blocked passageways designed to confuse tomb robbers. The burial chamber originally contained 2 sarcophagi, one for the king and one for his daughter, although she was later buried elsewhere. The most remarkable feature of the complex was its vast mortuary temple, which covered an enormous area and was described by classical authors as a labyrinth of halls and corridors. After the death of Amenemhat III, his son, Amenemhat IV, succeeded him. His reign lasted about 9 years and is relatively obscure compared to those of his predecessors. His rule was less focused on grand construction and more on maintaining existing projects. We know that during his reign, mining expeditions were once again sent to the Sinai, and trade with the Levant and Nubia continued. During this time, large numbers of people from Asia began to enter the Nile Delta, marking early developments that would shape the following period. Amenemhat IV died without a clear heir, bringing an end to the male line of the dynasty. He was succeeded by Sobek-Nefru, likely his sister or wife, and possibly a daughter of Amenemhat III. Sobek-Nefru, who reigned for only 4 years, is the first fully attested queen of Egypt. She adopted royal titulary, combining both feminine and masculine elements in her representation. She contributed to building projects and left behind various statues and inscriptions. With her death, the 12th dynasty came to an end. The 12th dynasty is considered the golden age of the Middle Kingdom. During this period, Egypt was at its wealthiest, conquered new territories, and underwent significant developments in governmental structure. The expansion of the bureaucracy helped diminish the power of the nomarchs, improve tax collection, and mobilize manpower more efficiently. Compared to the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom was far more intrusive in the lives of ordinary people. During this time, many from the lower and middle classes, both men and women, were required to perform labor as payment to the state, either through work projects or military service. Some may have successfully avoided this obligation, but if caught, they could be sent to the mines or to the forts of Nubia. The state was supported by a taxation system based primarily on agricultural yields and resources from land and waterways. Certain institutions, particularly temples and religious foundations, could receive partial or full tax exemptions by royal decree. One important consequence of the bureaucratic expansion was the significant increase in the number of scribes, which in turn led to the production of numerous literary works. The Middle Kingdom was regarded by the Egyptians themselves as a classical golden age of literature. We have already mentioned the tale of Sinuhe and the instructions of Amenemhat, but 2 other notable works are the tale of the shipwrecked sailor and the story of the eloquent peasant. The first one recounts the story of an Egyptian sailor who survives a shipwreck and is stranded on a mysterious island. There, he encounters a giant talking serpent, the divine ruler of the island, who comforts him and explains that his misfortune is part of fate. The sailor is eventually rescued and returns to Egypt with gifts. The story emphasizes themes of destiny, divine protection, and most importantly, hope in the face of hardship. The second story follows a poor peasant who is robbed by a corrupt official while traveling. Rather than giving up, he repeatedly petitions for justice, delivering a series of powerful and eloquent speeches. His words impress the authorities, and in the end, justice is served. The corrupt official is punished, and the peasant is rewarded. The tale highlights the importance of moral order, or ma'at, and the power of speech. These works represent only a fraction of the literature once produced, much of which has been lost to time. After the end of the 12th dynasty, the 13th dynasty was established. It kept the capital at Ichtawi and maintained the existing administrative system. However, unlike the previously stable royal line, this dynasty appears to have been composed of multiple families, with kings rotating among them. This may explain why many rulers had very short reigns. Despite this political instability, the state continued to function effectively for a time. Trade remained active, Lower Nubia stayed under Egyptian control, and artistic quality remained high, even if royal monuments became less impressive. However, our knowledge of individual kings is limited, and periods of unrest are suggested by gaps in the archaeological record. Some rulers, such as Mentuhotep I and Sobek-Hotep IV, managed to restore a degree of stability and left behind notable monuments. Even so, their power was not absolute, particularly in the Nile Delta. There, periods of severe drought led to famine, and then to mass unrest. Around 1710 BC, a separate political entity emerged, known as the 14th Dynasty, centered on the city of Avaris, or Hutwaret, the House of the Great One. The kings of this new dynasty were of Canaanite origin. The movement of foreign populations, mostly Canaanites from the Levant, into Egypt was a gradual process that had been taking place for centuries. As early as the Old Kingdom, Egypt maintained trade and diplomatic contacts with the Near East. Through these interactions, small groups of foreigners, referred to by the Egyptians as Asiatics, began to enter Egypt, often as traders or laborers, with most of them settling in the Nile Delta. Several also came as prisoners of war as a result of raids conducted by the rulers of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. During the Middle Kingdom, especially under the later 12th Dynasty, this movement increased rapidly. Egypt's prosperity and stability made it an attractive destination, and many Asiatics settled in the Eastern Delta. Some worked in agriculture, trade, or domestic service, while others may have served in the military or even in the administration. By the time of the 13th Dynasty, as central authority weakened, the Egyptian state became less capable of controlling its borders. This allowed for a greater influx of these populations, who gradually established a stronger presence in the delta. Much of the region came to be dominated by Asiatic communities. These groups maintained aspects of their own culture, such as pottery styles, architecture, weaponry, and burial practices, while also adopting many elements of Egyptian culture, especially in administration and religion. This cultural blending helped shape the emergence of the 14th Dynasty. Aside from the names of its rulers and a limited number of artifacts such as royal scarab seals, very little is known about this dynasty. We do know that a major temple was constructed at Avaris, dedicated to both Egyptian and Canaanite deities, specifically Hathor, Set, Asherah, and Baal Hadad. As for the 13th Dynasty, the weakening of central authority became increasingly apparent over time, partly due to the growing power of the officials. The capital was eventually moved from Ichtawi to Thebes. Meanwhile, Lower Nubia, once firmly under Egyptian control, began to slip away, eventually forming an independent kingdom with Kerma as its capital, as many Egyptian fortresses were abandoned. By the mid-17th century BC, the 13th dynasty came to an end, and a new dynasty emerged in Thebes. At this point, Egypt was no longer a unified state, marking the end of the Middle Kingdom and the beginning of the Second Intermediate Period. Around 1650 BC, a massive army from the east, equipped with advanced military weapons, broke through the limited defenses of the Sinai border and poured into the delta, sacking, pillaging, and burning cities along the way, massacring populations and enslaving the survivors. They then pushed southward, conquering Memphis, Ichtawi, and much of the Nile Valley. They were known as the Hyksos, and they established their own dynasty, the 15th, making Avaris their capital. This is the version of events that later Egyptians promoted. Modern historical and, most importantly, archaeological evidence suggest a much more complex reality. The term Hyksos is the Greek rendering of the Egyptian term Heka Hasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands. This was a designation used both by the Egyptians and in some cases by the Hyksos themselves. The Hyksos did indeed originate from the east, although their exact homeland remains uncertain, possibly the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, or a region in between. What is clear is that they spoke a West Semitic language and were largely composed of nomadic populations, many of whom were skilled warriors. As mentioned earlier, people from the Near East had already been settling in the Nile Delta for centuries, and by this time formed a significant portion of the population in many areas. The arrival of the Hyksos built upon this existing presence. When they established their rule, the Canaanite kings of the 14th dynasty were reduced to vassals under Hyksos authority. archaeological evidence from Avaris and the Eastern Delta does not support the idea of widespread destruction, mass killings, or large-scale battles. While a violent takeover may have occurred, it was certainly not on the scale described in later Egyptian sources. Under Hyksos rule, the Delta became a region where Egyptian and Near Eastern traditions blended into a single political and cultural system. From Avaris, the kings of the 15th Dynasty ruled in the full style of Egyptian monarchs. They adopted royal titulary, used hieroglyphic inscriptions, and presented themselves as legitimate rulers within the Egyptian tradition. Some kings, such as Khian and Apepi, assumed multiple throne names and were referred to as sons of Ra. The Hyksos did not reject Egyptian gods, as later sources might suggest. Instead, they restored and dedicated monuments to deities such as Hathor and Sobek, while also maintaining a strong association with Set, a god linked with foreigners and the desert. At the same time, the Hyksos were fully aware of their foreign origins and did not attempt to conceal them. They introduced numerous Near Eastern cultural elements and deities, much like the earlier 14th Dynasty had done. Material culture in Avaris reflects a synthesis of culture. Egyptian-style scarab seals remained in use, while Near Eastern cylinder seals and imported goods from the Levant and Cyprus became increasingly common. The city developed into a major trade hub, linking Egypt with the Eastern Mediterranean and Nubia. The Hyksos administration itself appears to have included both foreign and native Egyptian officials. The 15th Dynasty is associated with the introduction of new military technologies, including the horse-drawn chariot and composite bows. Although it is unclear whether they introduced these technologies directly or accelerated their adoption, it is evident that Egyptian warfare was undergoing significant transformation by the Second Intermediate Period. Meanwhile, in the south, the Nubian kingdom of Kush grew into a powerful and wealthy state. Controlling fertile land, large numbers of cattle, and access to gold resources, Kush developed a highly organized society. Its rulers constructed great tumulus burials, some over 100 meters in diameter. Like the Hyksos, the rulers of Kush adopted elements of Egyptian culture while maintaining their own traditions. In Upper Egypt, the 16th Dynasty, centered at Thebes, existed in a precarious position between these larger powers. Although technically independent, it likely paid tribute to the Hyksos. Not much is known about its rulers due to limited surviving evidence. After several decades of fragile equilibrium between the three states, the peace was broken. The Hyksos began advancing southward, conquering the rest of Egypt and eventually capturing the city of Thebes, the last Egyptian stronghold. The 16th dynasty came to an end, and the Hyksos installed a new Egyptian dynasty on the throne of Thebes, the 17th, to serve as their vassals. This marked the lowest point in Egyptian history up to that time, as all of the land fell under foreign rule. However, the Egyptians, both the common people and the elite, would never fully accept their subjugation. To them, foreign domination was not merely a blow to their pride, but an abomination, an affront to their culture, religious beliefs, and the very balance of the cosmos. Not much is known about the earliest rulers of the 17th dynasty. One notable cultural development of this period is the evolution of funerary practices, as sarcophagi and coffins began to take on more human-like forms. Evidence suggests the existence of another short-lived political center at Abydos. The discovery of the tomb of Senebkai, a king who died in battle, points to a small and poorly understood local dynasty. Whether these rulers were independent or connected to Thebes remains uncertain, but their existence highlights the extreme political fragmentation of Egypt at this time. During the mid-16th century BC, open war erupted due to a Theban revolt against the Hyksos. The Thebans faced a dangerous geopolitical situation, as the Hyksos in the north appeared to have maintained contact with the Kush in the south, effectively threatening Thebes from both directions. Despite this, the Thebans managed to stabilize their southern frontier and prepare for a northern campaign. The Egyptian king Amenemhat II chose to take the offensive and march north. The campaign, however, ended in disaster. The Theban forces were defeated and Amenemhat himself fell into the hands of the enemy. He was brutally executed as a deliberate display of power. Instead of crushing Theban opposition, however, his death had the opposite effect. It became a rallying point. The humiliation of their king and the reality of foreign domination only deepened the resolve of the Thebans. The conflict was now turning into a war of liberation. Following his death, leadership passed to his family, particularly his wife, Queen Mentuhotep, who played a crucial role in holding the kingdom together during this unstable period. She helped maintain order and sustain the Egyptian army. When their eldest son Kamose came of age, he took a much more active role. Unlike his predecessors, Kamose left a more direct account of his actions. Rejecting the advice of his officials who preferred to maintain peace, Kamose chose war. His campaign was swift and aggressive. The Theban fleet sailed north along the Nile, attacking settlements under Hyksos' control and pushing deep into their territory. A stela that he erected recounts the following. When day dawned, I was on him as it were a hawk. When the time of perfuming the mouth arrived, I overthrew him. I destroyed his wall. I slew his folk. I caused his wife to go down to the riverbank. My soldiers were like lions with their prey, carrying off slaves, cattle, fat, and honey, and dividing up their possessions, their hearts rejoicing. Kamose claimed to have reached the vicinity of Avaris itself, plundering and disrupting Hyksos communications. However, he died suddenly during the war for reasons unknown to us, bringing his campaign to an abrupt end. Once again, Queen Mentuhotep held the kingdom together during this critical moment, preserving the state until Kamose's younger brother, Ahmose I, came of age. His reign would usher in a new golden age and the height of Egypt's power.